Hey, so I just wanted to note that this is my first video essay ever, and I'm recording this off of a PowerPoint presentation, so please bear with me, and I promise you that this is mind-blowing. So about a week ago, as of writing this script, I was watching Andrew Cunningham's video on why he thought Undertale was such a good video game, and he eventually made the statement that Undertale diegetically has a player. He would then go on to give his reasonings and explain what it meant for the story and how it connected to Undertale's main themes. I also watched a sort of documentary on the Earthbound Halloween hack and saw that a lot of Toby's ideals came directly from his initial claim to fame. Both games having the theming of the player being too curious for their own good and are willing to commit atrocities in order just to see what will happen next, even if the game rebels against that. So I did some thinking, and a lot of thinking. If Gaster is heavily implied to have some sort of deal with the creation of this survey program of some sort, obviously a survey is meant to collect data for the purposes of research and statistics. So what would Gaster be experimenting on? Well, of course, the player. We already know that Undertale Deltarune canonically has some sort of player who is playing the game, and so that really got me thinking. What if Gaster wants to see what will happen if the player is physically booted out of the game? If you really think about it, technically people within a video game world would view the people who play the game as some sort of angel or deity. Well, this also ties into the fact that that the player can also see the thoughts of other characters. This is backed up by the fact that Spamton awkwardly looks around at the camera during his neophyte, and at the end he asks if heaven is watching him become free. By cutting his own strings, he thinks that he can potentially leave the Dark World, and if he wasn't referring to the Dark World, then he is referring to leaving Deltarune itself. Keep in mind, an unused line is Spamton looks to the heavens, and clearly the player could be interpreted as some sort of deity as previously stated. Keep in mind that Toby wants us to look into the game's files, as there's unused code that ties into the game's lore. This is even backed up by the fact that Father Alvin greets Chris during the second chapter by saying, may the angel watch over you. To add on to this, one of the lines in Big Shot is he pulls the strings and makes them ring until your heart gets ripped up. And in addition to the fact that it's still so dark, it could imply that fusing with the Lightner's creation did not have gotten him out of the dark world that he believes to be a video game, even to go as far as to think that being a Lightner would allow him to leave Deltarune as a whole, as Chris is a Lightner and possesses the player soul. This ties back to the line in Big Shot, because it could refer to Gaster creating the reality of Deltarune and directing the game as it happens until it's time for the player to be booted out of the game. Other things that point towards the fact that we are the angel and Gaster's the creator of Deltarune is the fact that the song that plays while we seal the Dark Fountain is called the Holy, implying that we, as the angel, have some sort of control over this universe and are enforcing our own will upon it, creating and deconstructing dark worlds as the plot goes on. The sound that also plays when you land in the Dark World is named snd_him_quick.ogg, implying that indeed Gaster created this world. So what can we infer from all of this? The light inside your soul could refer to the fact that the player, being the angel in heaven, is in control of Chris. The line, the places that you know seem like fantasy, could also refer to the fact that the light world is a hub within a video game. The glitching out at the end of Chapter 2 could symbolize that Chris is starting to break free, as Rolse is potentially giving them a way out during cutscenes. In addition, could also symbolize that the player is starting to know too much, and the fact that the game is starting to rebel against them. We can also infer that the Dark Worlds are games within the game of Deltarune. Each chapter we've gone through so far some sort of gaming, including tabletop for Chapter 1, PC Internet for Chapter 2, and soon to be console gaming for Chapter 3. What will happen after Chapter 3, I'm not too sure. This also ties into the fact that Darkners seem to have some sort of attraction to the soul. Rolse blushes when touching you, and Spamton seems to think that by absorbing you, he can leave the reality of Deltarune. In essence, they have some sort of desire to be with their true creators as us human beings. It is even implied that Rolse is afraid of the player because he's constantly trying to pamper them and freaks out when Susie comes back from her fight with Lancer and when rescuing Noelle. Now this is when the rabbit hole really starts to get deep, as Undertale and Deltarune are parallel stories according to Toby Fox. So theoretically, characters within video games are suspending their own disbelief within suspension of disbelief. In addition, if Gaster's experiment involves darkness and the shadows cutting deeper, technically to us Undertale is our dark world, and Deltarune is Undertale's dark world, and the actual dark worlds are Deltarune's light worlds, dark worlds. Which means that if this whole suspension of disbelief things ends up wrapping back around back to us, we will have to suspend our suspension of disbelief as the game quite literally tries to rebel against us. Undertale's Underground, in and of itself, is also very similar to the Dark Worlds, as monsters can use magic. Both are representative of games where you have choices that impact the ending of the game. Both worlds even have something mysterious keeping them intact. But here's the thing. If Gaster has some sort of involvement in the creation of the game, does that mean the Dark Worlds are a game within a game that was created by another character that is within a game? Now, don't get me started on the fact that Asriel and Sans have some sort of connection to the Undertale universe, as Sans is completely ignorant of any fourth wall shenanigans that are brought forth, and Asriel made his own rainbow demon thing on his computer, symbolizing the true pacifist route. So theoretically speaking, which timeline or parallel story does Gaster even come from? So with all that information, what can we conclude? Personally, I believe that at the end of the game, if the roaring ever happens and or the Angel's Heaven is banished, then the player's soul will be inevitably booted out of Chris and into the vessel. I also believe that the roaring of the Titans could symbolize that games within games would lead to reality just going so deep that everything as a whole just rips apart and the players loses their sanity over all of these fourth wall breaks. This could be the reason why Lancer/Rules card turned into stone, because it's preventing them from being in the wrong game as they're going turbo if you ever watched Wreck-It Ralph. Also, if Chris is indeed the knight, then they would technically want the roaring to occur to be freed from the angel's grasp. This ties into the fact that King and Queen don't know what will happen if too much darkness spreads, so it could be Chris's plan to free themselves. So how can we predict how the game ends? We can't. Because if the game pulls Chris and the player's soul so far apart, then the player will have to dodge anything bad that will happen to them. And Toby knows this. If my theory is correct, then Toby is going to have to pull this off in a way that nobody can possibly predict. Because if the player knows that something bad is about to happen, they will try and prevent it at all costs. If anything, it's like knowing what someone will play in a game of rock, paper, scissors. And, well, Toby's going to counter it. Nothing we can do will prevent the roaring and the banishing of the Angel's Heaven, aka reality being torn apart so much that the player can no longer play the game due to the game itself revolting. And this, of course, is what Gaster wants to experiment on. So some other miscellaneous things I would like to touch upon are the following, but didn't really fit into my other points, or just one-off things. First off, do timelines in Undertale Deltarune have anything to do with the fact that there are millions of players playing these games? Does Gaster know this, and did he account for this? Is glitching the game, listening to its soundtrack, and buying merchandise have anything to do with the canonicity of the game? We know the player is canon to the game, so interactions I just mentioned may have meaning to the story overall. Gaster named the tracks. Do the track names have any canon meaning? If the player ends up doing more Snowgrave-like routes, will there be consequences? Will Megalovania play as a result of us being too furious for our own good and committing horrible actions, similar to the Halloween hack in Undertale? Does Gaster know this? Does the fact that the moon in Noelle's room have anything to do with the fact that she's in a game within a game? Because it's a baseball. And finally, because no one's touched on this, does Muffet's absence in Deltarune have anything to do with the fact that if you stretch her laugh out with a specific algorithm in FL Studio, some other effects result in muse_smile.ogg? Because no one's really talked about this. And that's it for my video. So like and subscribe if you want. If you found this interesting, leave a comment below. And yeah, see ya.